Hey folks, welcome back to the channel, welcome back to the garage, and welcome back to my 1970 Corvette. Guys, today I'm going to be taking off the carburetor so I can do a little adjusting of it, doing some kind of bench tuning, if you will. And just wanted to kind of take you guys through the process of how I'm going to remove the carburetor, pull it over to the bench, and then I'm going to show you what I'm going to do. I'm not going to go through all of the steps I think that are recommended for tuning a carburetor, like replacing, checking the power valve, doing the jets and things like that. Primarily what I'm interested in is to make sure those butterflies, the valves are at their proper adjustments. So that's mainly what I'm going to be doing. Also, we're going to be checking the float bowl level, make sure those are set properly. But as I'm doing that, I'll also kind of tell you and give you guys some information on the other steps that I'm not going to do, but some other steps on what you can do to further tune, or I guess advance tune, your carburetor. Alright guys, so what we're going to be working on today is my Holley 750 double pumper in my 1970 Corvette. This is an LT1 clone, I guess, if you will. This is not a true LT1 car, not a factory LT1. However, this engine was replaced, probably best I can figure, sometime in the early 70s by my father, probably sometime around 72, 3 or 4, something like that. My dad actually bought the car in 72 when he got back from Vietnam, and then used to road race and autocross and daily drive this car, believe it or not, back in the 70s all the way up probably through the mid 80s. And so he put a little bit more potent engine in it for doing the autocrossing and road racing. And then of course the tried and true Holley 750 double pumper is what graces the top of this intake manifold. So we're going to pop this thing off, we'll take it over to the bench, and then we'll get inside underneath and I'll show you what I'm going to do to make sure these valves are adjusted kind of the way I would like them to be, and then we'll get it put back on the car. We'll check the float bowls, I'll show you how to do that, and then we'll also talk through some of the other adjustments and settings that you can make to these carburetors. So let's go ahead and get this thing taken off, get it on the bench, and then we'll start talking a little bit more about it. Alright guys, so there she is. There's the Holley 750. Yeah, just a little dirty, but we'll get it cleaned up a little bit. And first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to empty the fuel out of both of these fuel bowls, because we've got to flip the carburetor over to take a look at the underside, to look at these valves, these butterfly valves here, to make sure they are set properly. So let me go ahead and do that first. Now that I've got the gas drained out of both bowls, you can see it was pretty straightforward. You just need to take off one of these mounting screws and just dump it into a, gasoline safe container. And you probably noticed I switched over to wearing some gloves. Anytime you're dealing with oil, fluids, gas, whatever, I always like to wear gloves. I'd suggest anybody wearing gloves, it would just protect your hands. So anyway, let's get into this carburetor here. So what we're going to do is flip it over, and we're going to take a look at the bottom side of the carburetor. Now, just for orientation here, again, if you remember, this is the way the carburetor came off of the car, so the car would be facing front. This would be the front of the car, so your jets on the front here, these are going to be your primary jets. Alright, so we're going to flip it over, and we're going to take a look at underneath the carburetor here, and I hope this turns out well on the video for you. So it's probably not, but I'll kind of walk you through what I'm talking about here and what I'm looking at. So on your primary ports, I guess, or the primary bore, if you open up the carburetor, you can see, or you will see, a thin, and this is not going to turn out well on video, I apologize, but you'll see a thin or a narrow groove in the in the bore or on the wall on the front side of the bore. It looks just like a very narrow rectangle. And so quite simply what you want to do, and it looks like this carburetor is adjusted a little bit too closed. What you want to do is have the valves opened just slightly, such that you have about 20 thousandths of an inch of that little groove showing. And what that would look like is quite simply just a very small square. And so what I'm going to do to try and adjust that is I've got a little feeler gauge here, and my feeler gauge is only, the smallest I have is 22 thousandths, not 20 thousandths. But you know, 22 versus 20 thousandths, I think that's pretty close enough. So I'm going to adjust that valve, or the butterfly, such that it is opening, or such that it reveals that opening in the in that slot where it looks just like a very small square. So let me go ahead and do that right now. So when I open the primary, perhaps you can see there is the this little vertical groove right there on the back side of the bore, and that is that slot that we're going to try and adjust to where it is just a very small square. So mine, I can already tell my carburetor, the valves, or the primary valve, is closed too much. So I need to adjust it just a little bit, get it opened. I'll do that by just adjusting this idle screw here. So just to where that little valve, that slot is showing. And then I'll stick my little feeler gauge in there. And actually it looks like my feeler gauge is, nope, I thought it might be too wide to fit in that slot, but it's not. So we'll get that adjusted just a little bit more. There. So again, I'm using a 22 thousandths versus a 20 thousandths feeler gauge, and it is just barely kind of getting stuck in there. So let me go ahead and adjust that just a hair more. And then we should be good. There. Alright, so I'm happy with that, and I wish I had like a macro lens or something so I could really get you guys down in there. But again, what you want to do is you want to adjust these butterfly valves on the primary to where you've got a 20 thousandths opening of that transition slot, and when you get it right, it'll look like a really small square. So that's what you want to do for the primaries. Alright, now for the secondaries, this process is going to be just a little bit different. There is a transition slot in the secondary as well. So what you want to do, this is a little bit simpler, this is a little more kind of a feel type procedure, you know, what looks right to you. So what you want to do is hold this carburetor up to the light. What we want to do is we want to look at the light gap on the primary, and then you want to match that basically to the secondary. Alright, now to adjust the secondary, there is a very small screw over in this hole here that you just want to take a flathead screwdriver and turn it to get that secondary to adjust. So this is going to take just some eyeballing, and you probably just a couple different iterations to get it to where it looks right, again, to look at that light ring around both pairs of butterfly valves, or butterflies. And so that's what I'm going to do now. Come back as soon as I get this thing to where I like it. Alright, so I've got it kind of where I think it's right. Let me flip you guys around here just to see what you guys think. So you can kind of see the light rings, almost like I guess you kind of think of it like a total eclipse or something. So you can, see that ring of light around those butterflies. Again, your secondary's on the left and the primary's on the right. Alright, so I'm not going to dwell over that too terribly much. I think we've got it pretty darn close. And then that is really all I'm going to do here on the bench. And then we're going to get the carburetor put back on the car, and then we're going to adjust. Well, we can't adjust it right now, but I'll walk you through the procedure to adjust the float bowls, or the floats in the bowls. I guess what we can do here on the bench is we can adjust or get it close. We can get these idle mixture screws pretty darn close. So on my particular model, I've got 2 idle mixture screws. I've got one on the passenger side and one on the driver's side of the primary metering block. I do not have idle mixture screws on the secondary metering block. Yours may be different. So quite simply, to get these at a good baseline setting, to where you can get the car started, what you want to do is bottom these things out, so screw them in clockwise and bottom them out just lightly. Alright, so it's bottomed out. And what you want to do is back it out about 1.25 to 1.5 turns. I'm just going to go ahead and back it out the full 1.5 turns. So there's half, 1, and another half. So again, you just want to bottom it out lightly, back it out about 1 to 1.5, 1.25 turns, somewhere in that range, and that'll get you in the range to where you can get the car started and start doing some finer tuning on the carburetor. I guess I can also show you here, while we've got it on the bench, the sight plugs on the carburetor for your fuel level in your floats, or in your bowls here. So you've got one on the front and one on the back, and these are simply flathead screws. They're pretty small, so if you're doing this on the car, just be careful. I have dropped one of these before, and I was fortunate enough that it fell down in between the car and I was able to find it on the driveway, but you can see how small that screw is. So what you want to do with your fuel level is you want to get a 5/8 wrench. So the screw here, this is a locking screw. Okay, you want to loosen the lock screw, put your 5/8 inch wrench on the nut. Actually, you can probably just do it with your hand. Yep. The proper level is about, when you take the sight plug out, the proper level is right about where that fuel just barely dribbles out of this hole. You rock the car a little bit, the fuel barely dribbles out of that hole. If you take the sight plug out and fuel just starts pouring out of the sight plug hole there, you've got the float too high. So to lower the float and to lower the fuel level, you just want to take the nut and screw it clockwise. That'll lower that float. And conversely, if you need to raise the float, you turn it counterclockwise. And then, of course, turn your locking screw down so it doesn't move. But I'll do that probably off camera once I get the car set up, or once I get the carburetor back on. I've already, roughly set the sight plug or set the fuel level to where it needs to be. I did that actually before I took the carburetor off camera, so I feel like it's at a pretty good level. But once we get it back on the car and full of fuel, we'll get that checked out. Alright, so the other couple things that we're not going to do, or that I'm not going to do, is fine-tuning your accelerator pump, which is, you've got one over here, which is your primary, and then also one at the rear, which would be your secondary. And just rule of thumb is you want this arm to have a little bit of play, because when you hit the throttle, that pushes down on that accelerator pump and it shoots gas into the carburetor. So you want to adjust this screw to where you've got just a little bit of play, but not too much. Yeah, basically just to where it's touching. And same thing with the secondary. You know, I can jiggle this around a little bit, but the up and down movement, you know, there actually is no play in that. So, you know, your secondary pump there, those two are good, so I'm not going to mess with those right now. You know, and then there's a couple other things you can do with these carburetors. You know, you can mess with the opening rates on them. There is a couple positions here. You see there's position 1 and position 2, and then if you look underneath here, this little plastic cam. These things are for finer tuning, finer adjustments to get your secondary opening rate, you know, to where you want it, depending on your driving application. But for now, I'm not going to mess with any of that. I like the way this carburetor is set up for my car. You know, it just needed some adjustment on the primary and secondary valves, the butterfly valves, and then, you know, we're also going to reset the idle mixture screws, and then just double check the float levels in the bowls. So that's it. Alright guys, so that's it for this carburetor tune-up, setup, whatever you want to call it. You know, I have not... Oh, one other thing here. Inside, see if you can see this here. Inside, so right here where this Phillips screw is, this is going to be your jetting, one of your jets. This is your secondary jet. There's also one back behind that choke valve, choke butterfly there. You know, that just adjusts the amount of fuel, the squirters, you know, that squirt the fuel into the carburetor itself. I'm not going to mess with those either right now, nor am I going to adjust or replace the power valve or the jets on the metering block. So anyway, for right now, I've got the carburetor kind of where I wanted it, and mainly what I wanted to show you guys was how to adjust the idle mixture screws, talk about the float bowl level adjustments, and then also talk about those primary and secondary butterfly valves, how to adjust those and kind of what they should look like at initial setup. So that's going to be it for now. I'm going to get this carburetor put back on the car. I hope this video has been helpful to you guys. If it has, be sure to hit that thumbs up. If you've got any comments or suggestions for me, go ahead and leave them down in the comment section below. I read all of the comments and I'll respond to them as best I can. And if you got any questions, I will certainly answer those to the best of my ability. So guys, that's going to do it for this video. I appreciate your support. Appreciate you stopping by. If you hadn't done so already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I look forward to seeing you guys on the next one.